Welcome everyone to Shop Talks. Shop Talks is a production of the Ink Kitchen. Check out inkkitchen.com and our YouTube channel, and Impressions Magazine and the show here. And our main sponsors help make this free, which is a pretty great thing. Los Angeles Apparel, Alpha Broder, their generosity, along with Stalls, Transfer Express, LAT Apparel, Hirsch, Howard Custom Transfers, and Lane 7 make all this free for all of you guys. And I am also want to point out we're selling posters over here that we're printing live. You should check them out, old school printing. And the benefits go all to Adelaide's Place, which is a women's shelter here in Atlantic City that does a really great job with no money. That's why we're giving them some money. So check that out. And if you've never seen Lucy the Elephant, it's in Ventnor, about 5 minutes away from here. It's a giant wooden elephant. All right, I'm here with Mark Lane. When we first started the Shop Talks, he did one of the first ones, and it's still one that I remember the most. He and I were talking earlier how most things in this world have a curve up and down, and Mark Lane has skied those hills, and he's from Coed Sportswear, and he's going to tell his story, which is a harrowing tale of the heights and the lows of this business. So take it away, Mark. Glad to have you here. Oh, he has a new book, which I hope you're going to tout, actually.
I'll selfishly
no, please do.
tout my book. Thank you very much. I appreciate coming back and doing another one of these Shop Talks. I think they're awesome. I think seeing the crowd of people that have been here today, I know we're all getting a lot of good information out of these presentations. So mine is, I'm going to apologize in advance because I can talk about Coed Sportswear forever. I've been in business for 32 years. As Rick said, we've had really, really successful times, really, really difficult times, challenges all along the way. We've changed our business model 3 times probably in 32 years. And life is full of challenges, but if you stick with it and you kind of find the right path, you can always be successful in the end. And I wouldn't change a thing. Even when we had years where we have failed or not done what we had hoped we would do, we always found a way to get beyond it. And it's really just a lot of perseverance. So to the point where I actually wrote this book about it, right? So I don't know how many of you guys remember Coed Naked back in the early 90s. But Coed Naked, I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about a lot of different things. And certainly if you guys have questions, feel free to ask.
Oh, actually, and you hang around after, it's going to be a happy hour where you have free drinks.
Oh, there you
can
go.
Talk to us.
Yeah,
so how's
that's
that?
Even better. So I'm going to talk about how Coed Naked got started. I'm going to talk about the challenges that we faced, the successes that we faced throughout this process, and it's all in this book as well, which I'll come back to towards the end. And this kind of also has come full circle because we just relaunched Coed Naked last summer. So it's really the first time it's been in the market since the really early 2000s. And so we're excited about that. And as I go, I'll kind of circle back to how all this came about. But for those of you who remember Coed Naked back in the day in the early 90s, I originally wrote this book because a lot of people would come up to me and say, hey, you're the Coed Naked guy, and this is how you started. And I remember because you and some college professor at UNH got together and came up with this line. Well, that's not true. And everybody that had heard about Coed Naked would come up to me and say, tell me how I started the company. And sometimes they were a little bit right, but most of the times they were very wrong. Because I didn't actually start Coed Naked. What happened was, I'll give you the quick background. I was at the University of New Hampshire. I went home for Thanksgiving probably as a sophomore, and my mother was doing our laundry, and my older brother, she was folding one of my older brother's shirts, and it said, Boston College Coed Naked Lacrosse, and I loved it. And she accidentally put that shirt into my pile, so I accidentally took it back to UNH with me because I thought I'd be a unique student with one of the most unique shirts out in the marketplace. So my brother wasn't too thrilled with me, but what the heck? That's what brothers are for. So I went. I quickly realized that I was not as unique as I thought, because I saw all these Coed Naked shirts popping up at the university on campus. And I got to know the guy that was doing it. He was actually a student from the University of Colorado. And he went to the University of Colorado, came up with this Coed Naked lacrosse with a catchphrase that said, "Rough, tough, and in the buff." And he was selling them at the University of Colorado for beer money, essentially. But he sold so many of those shirts that he quit school. And when I'm talking to students, I always say, I don't recommend that, by the way. But he quit school. He moved back to Durham, which is where the University of New Hampshire is. It's where he grew up. And he started a business selling Coed Naked shirts. And that's where I met him. And by the time I graduated, I was so intrigued. And I was graduating with my master's degree in business and a history degree. So I thought, I was watching all my classmates in the master's program go out and get these $40,000 a year jobs working at banks and, these big insurance companies. And I took a $7.50 job to go and work with this kid because I was so intrigued by what he was doing. And so I started working for him, thinking that I was going to, someday take over the Coed Naked business. But it didn't really start out that way. I really was doing a kind of a different marketing job for a different product. But needless to say, I was in the building, so I was close. And I went to work. I started in, I think, June of 1990. I went to work on, I can remember the date, August 23rd, 1990. I got there, and there were chains on the door. The place was locked up. And what had happened is he was being sued, and this was a young kid, 22 years old. He was being sued by the Collegiate Licensing Committee for putting University of New Hampshire and University of Colorado on the shirts without a license. And at 23, and I don't know how much he was being sued for, but the rumor out there at the time was $400,000. And so at 23 years old, at $400,000 lawsuit, he shut down the business and said, "I'm done," which gave me an opening. So I ended up buying the company with a couple business partners for $15,000. But what we did is we didn't buy the company. We started our own company, which is called Coed Sportswear. And we bought, what we bought from him was the trademark for Coed Naked, his customer list, and his artwork. So that's what we bought. And
Good deal.
yeah, it was a good deal. I mean, at the time, it was a scary deal because I didn't have a dime to my name. And I remember going out to...
If he was doing beer money, that's a lot of beer.
Well, that's a lot of... Yes, it is a lot of beer. I remember going to banks, knocking on the doors because we needed some seed capital. I was a recent business major, business graduate student, so I made a business plan for Coed Naked. And I remember going to one bank and I showed him my business plan. I said, okay, we're going to do $1 million in year one. We're going to do $2 million in year two. It's going to be highly profitable. And the guy slammed the door in my face and said, "You don't have a clue." And I was like, all right, well, so I went to the next bank, and I went to the next bank. Most of them didn't want to even engage me because I was just a young kid walking in with a crazy idea. But I finally did find a bank in Concord, New Hampshire, that was willing to, with my parents' co-signature, give me a loan for $13,000, give my partner a loan for $13,000, and we had a third partner that threw in $20,000. So we had $46,000 to start our business. So that's what we did. That was in October of 1990. So the title of my book is The Coed Naked Truth, which is what this is I'm telling you how it started, but it also has a subtitle of The Triumphs and Pitfalls of Owning a Small Business. My first pitfall really happened at the end of the year, in January of 1991, really. And we had an outside accountant that came and said, guys, you're down to $700 from your $46,000. and you don't have the sales to pay the small amount of rent we were paying and the T-shirts that we were trying to buy for the very few orders that we had. And so we took that $700, my business partner and I, and we decided to fly to Orlando because we figured if sales was our problem, we'll knock on every beach store that we could find and sell our T-shirts. So that's what we did. We flew to Orlando, rented a car.
I gotta say this, that came out of nowhere. It's like, we got 700, what are we gonna do with the last 700? We're gonna fly to Orlando. Okay.
Fly to Orlando. We
All right,
figured that's
sorry
a
to
good
interrupt.
place.
Keep going, that's great.
So we rented a car. We went from Orlando. I'm sorry, we didn't fly to Orlando. I take that back. We flew where the race is? Daytona. We flew to Daytona. We rented a car and we hit every beach shop from Daytona to Palm Beach before we realized that we were wasting our time. And we were wasting our time because every single door that we knocked on said, the owner is in Orlando. Oh, the owner is in Orlando. And we're like, okay. It took us geniuses to Palm Beach before we realized that maybe we should be in Orlando. So we turned the car around, we drove to Orlando, and discovered that's where the Orlando Surf Show was. So we walked in there thinking we'll find some customers in there. Well, that wasn't going to happen either. This place, if anyone remembers the Orlando Surf Show from the early 90s, it was packed and it was huge and it was distracting and people were in a rush. And so we saw, anytime we saw, a guy walk by or a woman walk by with a badge that said buyer, we're like, hey, can we show you your and like, no, I got to go to an appointment. They didn't want anything to do with us. So honestly, by the end of the first day, which was the second to last day, we were a little depressed. We had about, maybe $200 left of our 700 with very little prospects. But towards the end of that show on that first day, we walked the aisles one more time. This is, kind of this time of day where people are tired. They're starting to hit the bars. And we walked by one of the more busy booths that we thought kind of represented our shirt the best. And we started shooting the shit with this guy named Ira. And he said to us, what are you guys doing here? And we showed him our T-shirt. And he goes, oh, I've heard of that. I was like, that's all I needed to hear. We had a guy that had heard of our shirt. So we talked to him a little bit further. It turns out he was a sales rep from a fairly large sales group. He says, hey, let me talk to my boss and we'll see if he's interested in taking on this line. Problem was the boss had left for the day, so we agreed to come back the next morning. We did. Boss shows up, said, I don't know, it's okay, whatever. And he said, how big are you guys? So we, of course, lied through our teeth and said, oh, we're pretty big, We've got this big facility and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, what's your, how much capital do you have? Can you purchase shirts if we start ordering? Oh, yeah, we've got a bank behind us. Yeah, the bank that barely lent us $13,000. We stretched the truth, to say the least. He said, well, if, the orders start coming in, can you produce them? Of course. You have your own print facility. No, but we use a print facility down the street. Yeah. We walked out of there a little concerned that he could see right through us. But in the end, he said, Ira, if you like the shirt, then give it a shot. We'll see what happens. So my partner and I flew back to Boston, got back to Coed, our little 5,000 square foot facility. And sure enough, there were orders on the fax machine. And then there were more orders, and there were more orders. So that was our first problem. Our first pitfall is, all right, we have $200. Who do I call that'll give us credit for T-shirts? To make a long story short, in the beginning, I'm going to kind of speed up the timeline here. We were essentially out of business in 1990 after our accountant said you're down to $700. At the end of 1991, that sales group had done $1 million worth of sales for us, which we somehow miraculously produced. In 1992, the momentum continued, and Coed Naked, became a fairly popular item out in the marketplace. We went from $1 million to $2.5 million. In 1993, we went from $2.5 million to $7 million. In 1994, we went from $7 million to $23 million, and we won Entrepreneur of the Year, believe it or not. We went to the White House.
There's a picture that comes around, right?
Yeah, with President Clinton. What happened, it's a crazy story. I was 27 years old. I was essentially bulletproof in my mind. I didn't have to worry about anything. I just had to show up for work, and everything was magic, right? We had been nominated for New Hampshire Employee of the Year, and we won it. There's one of the articles. Because we won that, we went to the regional competition, which we didn't think would win, but we won it. And then by, I think it was January of '95, we were told that we would win Young Entrepreneur of the Year at the national level and would be celebrated in May with President Clinton right here for Coed Naked t-shirts, believe it or not. It's insane. There's a little irony in that.
More than a little.
So by May of 1995, I was, I think, 28 years old, on top of the world, bulletproof. We moved from our 5,000 square foot facility to a 60,000 square foot facility, which we're still in. We sponsored a race car, which is up here as well. We had our ceremony at the White House, and in the first quarter of 1995, we had doubled what we had done in the first quarter of 1994. So we were on pace to do $50 million worth of business. We had, in those days, there weren't a lot of alphas around, Alpha Apparel or S&S and those types. You couldn't just buy shirts at that level that quickly. So we had to purchase shirts well in advance. So we had to borrow $5 million from a bank, purchase all of these shirts 3 months in advance in preparation for this situation that we were facing of, $50 million in sales. Well, that's when the proverbial S hit the fan, so to speak. We didn't do $50 million in 1995. We ended up doing $17 million. So we hit a wall. And it was the first time in my career that I felt incredibly vulnerable and like I actually had to become a businessman and really try and understand, A, what went wrong, B, why did it go wrong, and C, how do I survive this thing? And consider at the time that I owed the bank $5 million worth of inventory that was essentially obsolete. So I had some problems that I had to deal with. Yeah. Well, it turned out there was a lot of reasons why, a lot of reasons for what went wrong. A lot of them I point out in this book. Things from oversaturation. Probably the biggest thing is school bannings. In 1993, all these high schools throughout the country started banning our shirts. And at first, you tell a high school kid what they can't wear, it blew our sales up, right? So it was one of the best things that ever happened to us. But I think in the end, we were naive. And eventually, the schools won out. So by the summer of '95, the mothers and fathers that were going, school shopping for their kids weren't buying Coed Naked anymore. And there were other reasons why it happened. But it was really our first challenge as a business. How were we going to survive this real problem? But we did. We figured it out. We took kind of a look at what our business model should be. and kind of to skip to that first or that next level of business model, we quickly recognized that we had one very important thing. We had this distribution channel, right? So even if Coed Naked wasn't the ultimate product that we would put into this distribution channel, we knew that we had a distribution channel. So
which is what most people don't have, right?
Exactly. And by distribution channel, we were in at our peak in the Coed Naked by end of '94. We were selling to about 12,000 independent mom and pop retailers throughout the country. And so what we did is we created this, a group of, we brought in artists. We created more and more designs that were non-Coed Naked, confrontational, so to speak, especially at the school level. And we started introducing those into our channel. The problem was nothing was as good as Coed Naked. We could never replicate it. And so, we went really over the next 5 years, this process of developing work, developing designs that some had, a modicum of success. Some of them had, probably great success by certain people's standards, but not by our standard because we had created this monster that we had to feed. So it was a very difficult 5 years where we really didn't make any money. In fact, we lost money on an annual basis. And by 2000, we went from $23 million in 1994 to just under $3 million by the year 2000. So there was pressure on me.
Yeah, I guess so, a little bit.
There was pressure because I now had 2 kids. I had my wife who was, convincing me that I should look into the .com craze that was going on. But I couldn't do it. This was my baby. This is where I wanted to be. I just, I was anxious. I was concerned. I knew that I didn't have a lot of time on my hands, but I had to try and make it work. And our first real transition into kind of a new type of business started really around 2000, 2001. And at that time, we also were faced with all of these other issues, right? There was these issues of the 12,000 retail doors that we had shrunk to about 1,500. There's a lot of consolidation in that mom and pop business at that time. But what there was a lot of was major department stores. There was the TJ Maxx's, the Dick's Sporting Goods, the Macy's, and all of these types of places. So what we decided to do was take our artwork and send it that direction, and we tried something new. We dug our feet in with the majors, so to speak, which worked quite well for about 4 or 5 years. And then, the next situation happened. And really that next situation was, we were profitable, like I said, for about 4 or 5 years with some success, but then it became very difficult to do business with these people. We weren't Nike, we weren't Adidas, we weren't Reebok, we were Coed Sportswear. And when you're Coed Sportswear...
They were super demand. Well, it's funny. I say one other thing too. So for people that are younger, so that world where you had the 12,000 outlets really changed fast, and there was all these, you probably had rep groups that took you in all these places, then that whole thing went away, right?
Oh, it totally went away.
Yeah.
Totally went away. And it's almost a shock to the system because the way we were famous in 1994 for doing this 24-hour shipping, no minimum order to these mom and pops, which meant we had to have a lot of inventory on hand. But it really boosted our sales back in those days. But to do business with these majors was a completely different animal.
Now, I remember one of them, when we sold stuff to them, they were like, we need you to put a piece of cardboard on top of every box so that when we cut it open, it won't cut the shirts.
Yeah.
I actually said, can't we put a sticker on it that says, be careful, asshole? But Anyway,
well,
that illustrates the kind of demand. They're very demanding.
Yeah, and the problem is you could have had stickers all over that box saying, "Can't you do this, asshole?"
And they'll still do a chargeback, right?
Yeah, exactly, right.
Even if they didn't cut the shirt, they'll charge you back.
That's right. That's right. And there's a couple, and I talk about chargebacks in this book. I talk about the challenges of dealing with these majors. I'll give you a couple quick examples of typical situations that we were running into, especially by 2008, when the shine kind of came off of our who we were with these majors, and they started to demand all of these things. And the first example is Dick's Sporting Goods, great company, but they connected with Galleons. I think it was it Galleons or yeah, I think it was Galleons. But they took on a lot of Galleons. I don't know, I guess traditions of being hateful to small companies like us. And we in 2006, we were vendor of the year for Dick's Sporting Goods. So our product was going into their retailers. It was not branded product, it was our own designs. And it was outperforming Adidas and Nike and all of their printed t-shirts. We won vendor of the year. In 2007, they decided to take our program overseas and cut us out altogether. So that's what we got for being vendor of the year. Another example is, I'll never forget what Kohl's did to us. They did this thing called, I guess it's a chargeback, but it's really, what's the word they use? I forget, I'll remember it. But basically, we sold them about $900,000 worth of stuff. I forget what year it was, probably around 2007, 2006. And in January of the following year, we got a bill from Kohl's for $110,000. And we're like, what's we didn't buy anything from you. Why are you billing us for $110,000? They said it was margin deficiency. That's what they called it, margin deficiency. We're like, well, what does that mean? They said, well, you sell us your shirts for $5. We sell them for $10, but we need to make a minimum of 40% margin on that. I'm like, well, if you sold them for $10 and you bought them for $5, it sounds like you're making 100% markup. I was like, so we're good, right? And they're like, well, you got all the Blue Dot specials, and then you got the 2-for-1 sales, and you got all of these things. I was like, well, I didn't tell you to do 2-for-1 sales. I think you probably would have sold all our shirts if you kept them at $10, because that's pretty cheap. Like, nope. And the deal with them is that if you didn't meet the margin, you had to pay them the difference between your, so if they required a 40% margin and you're only at 30%, well, we owed them 10% of the $800,000 or $900,000 in business. So our bill came to $110,000. Now, we weren't obligated to pay it, but, there's repercussions if you don't. And the repercussions are you lose the account. They won't do business with you anymore. So we negotiated with them and said, listen, we'll pay $20,000. That wasn't good enough for them. Well, then we'll make a deal with you. We'll give you $20,000 or $108,000 off of future orders, but the future orders have to exceed this volume. They weren't interested in that. You had to write them a check. We didn't write them a check, so we lost the business. So that's what was happening with all of these guys. I mean, it was just a brutal reality that we hadn't. And then they started putting EDI out there for us, which we were very EDI efficient by now. But talk about, another. I'll give you one third example, which is also in the book. But I think this was a Dick's Sporting Goods one too. So they would make you buy. So when we packed their goods, you had to pack them a certain way. 36 shirts into a box. You had to use a hanger that they required that we purchase. We had to buy the one that they required. You had to put a little size tab on it. And then you had to put a sticker on the outside of the box that was 1 inch over and 1 inch down from the top. That had all the UPC stuff on it. So we did all of that. But they would always charge you back for the very first mistake. They would charge you $750. And then after that, they would charge you a nominal fee for every mistake. But a lot of the mistakes were the size tab would fall off the hanger. So we'd call them and say, yeah, that's because you're making us order a crappy hanger. You know, that size tab doesn't work. But, you know, it doesn't matter. You know, if your label is over an inch and a half instead of the inch, that's the $750 fee. I mean, so it's not easy doing a business
No.
with these guys. So really what happened...
Actually, I'll remember one other, back in the, we were printing for a Reebok retail program or something.
Yeah.
And they're like, do we have to really stay up all night to send these tomorrow? Yes, you do. So we send them out, and then like almost 8 weeks later, they're like, why did you never send that order? And we're like, we did send it. We sent it on time. They had lost it in their distribution center.
Geez, yeah.
You know, so like they made us stay up all night to send something that they then didn't even care if they had it. Just, you know, we're...
Yeah.
Was that, remember Lily Tomlin? Like, we're the phone company. We don't care. We don't have to care. Like, it was like that, right? They were big, so they didn't care.
It's exactly right. They're big and they don't care, and it's very difficult doing business with that because we weren't important to them. You know, we weren't important to them, even though they were important, and they were important to us. So it was a tough reality for us to swallow. But to exacerbate the problem, 2008 was the next year, and we all know what happened that year. And that was probably one of the biggest challenges we faced as a corporation in 2008, because we had kind of this failing major business with these retailers, a business that we knew we were good at, but they didn't want to be good back to us. And at the same time, we had all this consolidation within the major business. So, you know, Macy's buying, Federated buying, whatever they were, Filene's and that group, and all the sporting goods companies were buying each other up. Sports Authority going out of business. All these places, you couldn't trust what was going on in the marketplace. So, and on top of that, the bank collapsed. The banking crisis occurred, and our bank decided to. At the time, we had $1 million line of credit with them. We were into it for about $800,000, and they called our note. So we had this huge debacle on top of everything else.
We had the same thing, actually. Our bank wanted to sell, so we had made our payments okay for like 12 years, never missed a payment, never late, and suddenly we were out of like, what's the word they have where you're out of compliance? Yeah, there's some word for it. And they could pull the loan, and they were going to take my building, business, and house to get the loan paid for.
Yeah.
Like, even though I had never made a late payment or anything.
Same deal. I didn't have the $800,000 to pay him back. That's why I borrowed the money in the first place. And the issue really, and I'm not saying all of this stuff to scare the entrepreneurial spirit. I wrote this book for a purpose.
Oh, I have them up here to scare you.
I wrote this book for a purpose because there was in amongst all of these challenges, there were a lot of good, positive years. It's just the reality is that there are always challenges, right? And this happened to be the next one. But if you can find a way to get by, and find a way to meet and I don't know, succeed when sometimes you feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, then that's very gratifying too. So at the end, it's 32 years I've been in this business, and I learned so much from all of the failures, probably more from the failures than the successes. I didn't learn anything from the original success except for how to eventually fail, so but I kind of speak more to the failings because I think those are the learning parts, right? And I don't mean, and I apologize if I sound like doom and gloom, because it's not. But that 2008 banking crisis was a real problem because they could have called my note. And I remember the first meeting I had with the workout woman at the bank, scariest moment of my life. And because I didn't have much to tell her. I mean, she wanted to know how my business was. Well, it sucked because these majors were consolidating, and the business climate, the economic climate was terrible. No one was spending money at retail in 2008. And it didn't look like it was going to get better anytime soon, but I couldn't tell my banker that. So I, made up the same kind of fibs I did when I went to my bank in 1990. So you tell a story. You try to tell about the most positive things that are going on. And what she did is she gave me an extension of 3 months. Well, I knew nothing was going to happen in 3 months in 2008. You just got to look at the news. So 3 months later, I got back to her and I told her the same old story. I got another 3 months. I did that for 6 years. 6 years. I had no bank. The next banking relationship I got was in 2014. In the meantime, my business was starting to pick up again and do well. It was a struggle. 2008 through 2010 was a struggle. 2011, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. 2012 was pretty good. But I still didn't have a banking relationship until 2014. I was even asked by Senator Shaheen, which is the senator from New Hampshire in my district, to go to Washington for my second time, not to meet with the president this time, but to testify in front of Congress about how the SBA and how the government can help small businesses, because this was a crisis. These banks were unwilling to take a chance on small businesses for that period of time. And I'm not suggesting that my financials deserved that chance at the level that I was, but I deserved something. We had been in business since 1990, and we were successful for many of those years, and we weren't the only one in the industry that was struggling. It was 2014 before I got that banking relationship back, and in that time period, there's a lot of other things that where I grew up in that time period, and it was. We went through a lot of changes. We had buyouts of partners, new partners coming in. My current partner, I actually made a partner in 2010 because he ended up resigning, and he was my top sales guy. So I wasn't going to let my top sales guy resign on top of everything else. So I ended up making him a partner, which was probably one of the best decisions that I've made in my business, because he's a dynamic, great sales guy. And the very first thing we did is we ended up buying out my other partner, so it was just the two of us at that time. But this is kind of our third transformation that happened in this 2010, 11, 12 timeframe. And when the writing was on the wall with these big retailers, that wasn't the type of business we wanted to be in. And there was we had an epiphany, and you bring up Reebok, which is kind of interesting, but our epiphany was that we weren't Nike, we weren't Reebok, we weren't Adidas, which is why these retailers weren't paying attention to us. So what we decided to do was go after these big brands and start doing business with them. And it wasn't easy. We begged and tried to get our foot into the door for a long time, but we finally did get our foot in the door. And that's all we needed. We performed it happened to be Reebok at the time. And once you perform for them, it becomes almost viral within Reebok itself. And you do a good job for one department, the next department wants to do business with you, and so on and so on and so on. And then this is a very incestuous business. So people from Reebok move and they go to New Balance, or they go to TB12, one of our customers today. Or wherever, and so they bring with it our reputation and their experience with us. So really, since 2012, our business has changed. We focused on big brands. It's grown our business again, and we probably were on the best stretch of business we had ever been on since 1991 to 2005. We were profitable every single year. 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 was probably the best year we had since 1995, or since 1994, I guess. We almost got a little lazy. We almost felt that feeling of invincibility.
You almost got another race car, huh?
We learned that lesson. We weren't going to do that. But it was life was good. Not to talk about another T-shirt competitor out there. We were doing well. We had a business model that was working. I finished this book at the end of 2019, and the book kind of changed over time. It started out as the Coed Naked Truth because I wanted to tell people how this company really started, because way too often people would come to me and tell me how the company started, and they weren't exactly right. So I had written down all of these fun facts and interesting things about Coed Naked and how great that product, start was, and all the fun we had in the early 90s. But as I was writing it, I realized that I had a lot more to tell, because we had been through all of these struggles and triumphs and pitfalls and triumphs, and it was a story worth telling. And it's really a story about perseverance. It's a story that I thought would be good for young entrepreneurs, or any entrepreneurs that are struggling and want to read about someone else's real-time struggles and how we kind of manage beyond it. So that's what this book became. And it ended on a really high note in 2019. And I literally was about to get it published. This was early 2020. And I was at a party, and my son at the time was at the university, was at Holy Cross in Worcester. And he was overseas in Ireland for a semester. And I got a call from him at 12 o'clock at night, late party, saying, I got to catch a plane and get home. You need to figure this out. It was 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning his time or something. I was like, what's going on? We were panicked. He said, I just heard Trump is shutting down all flights coming back into the United States. Of course, COVID hit. So I did not publish the book because I knew I was up against yet another challenge after 7 years of being in business. I don't have to tell you what happened after that, but the world kind of shut down. And all of our customers, the Adidases, the Nike, the Reeboks, and the New Balances, well, all of their business shut down. We no longer could print for the Boston Marathon or the New York Marathon because there was no Boston Marathon. We were told by our governor, like every other state in the nation, that if you weren't what's the word they use?
An essential business.
Essential business, you're out of business. Well, that was my. I guess my point is that even when things are going glowingly, you never know when that next challenge is going to happen, and that was it for us. But we've recovered, and I did publish the book, and I kind of ended it with, this whole new challenge of COVID without getting into the details of necessarily how we survived it. But the good news is we did survive it. And the good news is that we are a thriving business again. We're doing well, but we still have our challenges. And we have our challenges like any other business. And the challenges today are a little different. They're challenges that probably many of you face. And the biggest one we have today, I think I was talking to you about this earlier, Rick, is where did everyone go? Where are the screen printers? I can't find help, but we went from 85 employees down to 30, I think, during the height of COVID, and now that we're back up to 2019 kind of revenue levels, we only have 50 employees. We're 35 short. So there's new challenges, new experiences.
Automation.
That's why I'm here. That's why I'm looking, and that's exactly what it is. You can't find the people. You got to find ways to replace it.
No, you can't cry about it, really. It's the same as every other problem that you had, right?
Exactly.
Crying about it doesn't do any good. Maybe you're going to do a little of that, then you got to think about what you're going to do about it, right?
Exactly. I mean, it's not easy being an entrepreneur, as you know, and being a business owner. But I will say, and I'm sure you can say this too, especially when you're doing things like Shop Talk, and this is becoming such a popular event at these shows, and it's very gratifying. It's very gratifying in the end when you can, give back Start looking at things differently, taking a lot of the business problems and putting them on some younger people for change, like my son who just joined my company, and some of these other people. They can deal with the real problems, and I can come and talk to people here and talk to people at the University of New Hampshire about these challenges and how to get by and how to get beyond them.
Well, when we started the Shop Talks, part of it was to have people that actually knew what they were talking about, and to have people you could trust, and to have information that was relevant. So it's been refreshing to have you 2 times, because business does go up and down, and anyone that tells you otherwise is lying. Like, they're lying. Like, it never goes a straight line great.
No. I thought it did for 5 years, but it didn't.
Well, right when you're at the top of that wave, it looks like you're going up forever, except you're doing this.
Yeah, exactly.
It looks like that. And nobody's business that I know of is as rosy as any rosier than that, really. Maybe
Right.
it doesn't have the lows that you had, but I don't know anybody that it's all up. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I came to realize that, obviously, every time something, when you're 28 years old and you've only seen success, that first time that you're kind of knocked, down is really shocking. And I remember being devastated when the accountant in 1990 that told me that, I had $700 left and I should shut down the shop. She quit in 1996, kind of like when Coed Naked was on its downfall, and she was my accountant. I counted on her. I didn't know how to do the books, and she was. When that happens, your system is in a state of shock. It's like, how are you going to recover from this? But you do. You find another accountant is what it amounts to. But you start to believe that she's leaving for a reason. She's leaving because she doesn't have faith in what you're doing anymore, and that's hard to take sometimes mentally, and it's not easy. But it's not just the the work involved in going out and finding someone else who has different processes and all this other stuff. It's just getting beyond the mental piece of it too. But you have to do it, and you fight through it, and when you do, you're better off for it. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
That is true. All right, maybe we'll do some questions, eh? Any questions for Mark?
Yeah.
Yes. Hi. How would you prevent the financial struggles from 2008 from happening again?
That's a good question.
That's a really good
question.
question.
I'll tell you one of the things we did. We went from having, and you kind of go back to the 2005 debacle, or the 1995 debacle. I have a series of debacles in my head, but 1995 was one. But it's changing the business model to a certain extent and making sure, like we had $5 million worth of inventory that was obsolete back then. Well, our new business model, essentially it's no inventory. The total amount of inventory I have in the building today, is, the total dollar amount's a lot, but it's all spoken for. The total amount of inventory that is not spoken for is less than $10,000. So that's one thing. You look, try and find ways to, consolidate and manage your business differently. You kind of look at the banks, right? We're kind of having this little banking crisis now.
You don't trust the fucking bank. I'll tell you that. like I told you, my thing was the bank was going to sell, so that we weren't an A1.
Yeah.
My friend Jacob, there's covenants in your loans. You're just going to sign it. You're not a lawyer. And even if you are, what are you going to do? Not take the loan? So you take the loan. There are covenants that if you pay somebody else, pay a different loan off, that they can call your loan. So he had certain cash come in, and he paid off a loan, and then they called their loans. So while he was doing well, they called their loan. They're just not your friend. You know what I mean? You really the guy I dealt with at the bank was a very, very nice person. The bank themselves was like systematically evil, I would say, and that was one thing I would say.
Yeah, no, they banks like to lend money when you don't need it, and when you do need it, it's they don't lend you money, right? So I think a part of the answer as well is just to understand that cash is king, and to try and keep as much cash and as much assets that you can turn into cash as possible. It's kind of like the banks. I was saying, the banks today. They always get caught because if there's a run on the bank, some of these banks aren't playing by the rules and they don't have enough cash to in their and so that's what we try to do. Is just try to be a little smarter with cash.
Would you say, I don't know if you would, but I would, you also don't want to grow too fast. Like I think, that puts you that makes you very vulnerable.
Well, a lot of companies, a lot of small businesses, and we were not a party to that in '95 when we were growing like this. But when we were growing like that, a lot,
Happy hour will commence from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m.
Happy hour right over here.
Right here.
The shop talk stage.
Right over there.
At the end of the 800 aisle. Stop by for a complimentary beer or wine. Happy hour is sponsored by First Citizens Bank.
Oh, there you go, the bank. But
Take their drinks, but don't think they're your friend.
yeah.
That was a good question. Thank you. Other questions?
Would
Sorry,
you
go ahead.
suggest that you look to investors instead of banking? And then also, where is your book available? Is it on Audible?
The book is available at coednaked.com and on Amazon.
Okay.
I do have some copies here. If I brought a few copies, if some people want them. What was the other question?
Do you suggest investors
Oh,
then
investors.
your best, but rather than a bank?
Yeah, I mean, so as business partners, we heavily invested back into the business because we had no choice. That time period between 2008 and 2014, when I had no bank, we were the bank. So we were, we had no choice. It meant that I might have to take out a HELOC on my house. It might mean that I had to take some cash that, I was planning on using for my kids' college and, putting it back into the company. There's all kinds of those things. But to me, that's kind of using an investor. We never went out to an outside investment company just because we were so small and I wanted to keep that tight control. But I don't suggest that that's not a good idea, potentially.
It certainly has pitfalls, and
Yeah.
like if you want control, that's not always the best thing. I
Yeah.
think we only, maybe for very specific projects, someone would lend me the money just to get through a project. Like you're going to get a return on your money of this, and I knew it was for sure. I didn't want to, because it was often someone I knew. I didn't want to take the risk of
Right.
screwing up the relationship.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, I know like recently I went to the SBA asking for a loan, and it was to purchase a company that is in my niche. And they said, oh, yeah, we'll give you the loan, but you have to put 20% down. Well, the problem was I didn't have the 20% of the
Right.
$1 million to be able to put down to even get the loan.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's why I asked about investors.
Yeah, I mean, it actually surprised me a little bit with the SBA because I've had SBA loans in the past, and they've worked out well. They have all kinds of rules, but one of the nice things about the SBA programs that I was in, and maybe this one's a little different, it was you didn't have to put that much down. So I guess that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, some of those SBA ones, be careful. They
Yeah,
can follow
they-
you the rest of your life. You
they
can't
can.
get out of it. I know someone whose wife took the loan, and he has to pay it the rest of his life.
Yeah,
pretty much.
no, it's true.
It's you
There
gotta
are
watch,
pitfalls.
Watch out what you signed up for.
Yeah.
Other
Government
questions?
and banks.
Yeah. Other.
Well, congratulations. You're still in business.
Thank you.
I've been doing this since 1988. So I've gone through, as you remember, Rick, all the credit unions closed
Yeah.
in Rhode Island.
Yeah.
That pretty much put us under. Then the banking thing in 08 put us under again, and we're back again doing whatever. The question is, so the last time we had this conversation, you were like, Coed Naked would never work this day. I'm not going to come back. It's not
Yeah.
going to do. So what's different about Coed Naked now?
So I'm glad you asked. I mean, so I've always wanted to bring Coed Naked back. I mean, that was my baby. It was, the thing that people know most about Coed Sportswear. Everything we've done since Coed Naked is kind of behind the scenes. It's good stuff, but it's behind the scenes. Coed Naked was, it was magic to me. I love Coed Naked. So I've always looked for a reason to bring it back. There was 3 things that happened last year that were really clued me in as to needing to do it. The first was that there's this popular television show. So back in the days, the early 90s, Coed Naked was everywhere in the media. It was on television shows. It was everywhere. Well, there's a show called, a Netflix series called Yellow Jackets. And one of the first scenes in that show is this plane crashes on some island, and there's a girl hanging from a tree, and she's wearing a Coed Naked shirt. So I was like, okay, that's number one. The second thing is, in the 90s, I used to get, or not me personally, but Coed used to get all kinds of fan mail. We had, and hate mail, but a lot of more fan mail. So
From what, streakers or something?
no, there's people that wanted to see a Coed Naked such and such, or this design, or whatever. I've got a whole book at the office of all these crazy letters that I used to get.
Coed Naked screen printing.
Yeah, exactly. But I hadn't gotten any fan mail in 20-something years, and but then I got one all of a sudden. So I had the Netflix series, fan mail, but the most important piece was there's this kid. I was a UNH student when I discovered Coed Naked. There was a kid at UNH that I knew as a kid because I used to coach him in soccer and baseball, and he knew I was in the screen printing business. So he was a junior at UNH. He came to see me, and he had this idea. And I didn't think it was a great idea. He thought it was a great idea, but I wanted to mentor him through the process, which is what I really like to do now. And I was encouraging him, and I printed his first order for him, and he brought him back to UNH. The kid, as a junior, sold $150,000 worth of stuff at UNH. So I'm like, holy mackerel, this reminds me of the Coed Naked days. So I had him over one day, and I was walking him around the facility, and we have a bunch of Coed Naked, historical stuff and paraphernalia all over the place. And he asked me about it, so I was telling him the story. And he said, I've got to bring this thing back. I'm like, a college kid from UNH, after Netflix and a letter, you're the guy. So he relaunched it. He's doing all the social media. We relaunched it online. It's now starting to become available at retail again, believe it or not. It's doing incredibly well, much better than I had necessarily anticipated. So we'll see. There's going to be a big year for it, but that's the reason. We tested it. We did it online, so you can go to coednaked.com and buy Coed Naked again. But we tested it with 2 retailers last summer, kind of late in the season. One up in Maine on the beaches, and one down in Rehoboth Beach, and they both did amazingly well. And so that was kind of our clue that maybe we should start looking at retail again.
Okay. And I need a book.
Other questions?
How much time and energy do you use or spend on protecting your brand? Because now anyone can take a Coed Naked PNG and make their own stuff and throw it on Etsy or throw it on whatever. So is that something you're dedicating a lot of time towards, or are you just kind of staying in your lane and kind of riding your wave?
It's a really good question, and that used to be one of the things that I lost sleep over back in the early 90s, because everyone, when something's successful out there, everyone tries to repeat it. Whether it's Coed nude shirts or bare naked, and but trademark law allows us to protect it if it's confusingly similar, and we're very serious about it. You can go on Amazon today and you can type in Coed Naked, and you'll see a lot of people selling our old graphics, shirts that we actually printed years ago. But you'll also see bootleg stuff. And we send them a letter, and we have an attorney, a trademark attorney that that goes after those people, because it's it's not their property.
It's it's not easy. It's like whack-a-mole. They
Yeah.
just try to sell it. So there's all the different platforms. I think Redbubble's one of the worst.
It is.
I
Yep.
mean, they have algorithms that could stop it. They don't want to stop it. I've been at facilities like huge ones in California that are doing one-off on giant machines, and I would say like half of the shirts are bootlegs.
Yeah.
Like they don't care. Like they just want to sell more stuff.
Yeah,
so
it's
eventually it's going
difficult.
to take it's going to be an industry thing. I'm trying to get the Screen Printing Association to work on this because it's kind of like a lobbying thing to change the laws. It's like a pressure of lawsuits, and it's going to be like humiliation by the public. It's going to be like a multi-prong approach to stop it. I mean,
Yeah.
I have bands that like hardly sell 10 shirts a month, and people bootleg them.
Oh yeah.
It's ridiculous. We print for charities. People bootleg those.
Is-
Like to a large extent. Like we do the Farm Aid shows. Before that, I go and shut them down from all the different like things.
Yeah.
A lot of them overseas.
It's very difficult. I remember just two quick little stories. We'd go to trade shows. I used to get paranoid just handing out my catalog because I thought people were gonna, steal the designs. But we had one customer, not a customer, a bootlegger back in the early '90s, out of Pennsylvania, and we had sent them a letter, a legal letter, and all this stuff, and said you got to quit. And he called me and he says, "You pay me $5,000 and I won't print another Coed Naked shirt." I'm like, "So you're it's extortion." And so I sent that to my lawyer, and he's like, "Mark, he's selling a lot of Coed Naked shirts, and it's going to cost you more in legal fees to shut him down." I actually made that deal. I'm not sure I would make it again. It was probably mentally one of the most difficult decisions I ever made because he had to sign something saying that he wouldn't, and there were penalties if he did. But it's not a good precedent to set either. So I'm not sure I'd ever do it again. But that's how frustrating the process is.
Yeah, very frustrating. I mean, we were selling a shirt at one point, and this chain of stores in Canada, there was 30 stores. They just took the name of the artist off it and made it themselves. And then, I had some free legal help from a relative. Otherwise, I probably couldn't have done anything. In the end, they offered something that was less than if they had paid for it for real. And I finally said, "You know what? This is like you hit me over the head and stole my wallet, and like, fuck you. I don't care if I lose $30,000. You will pay me 10." And they paid. But normally, like, it's just frustrating, and there's no like law on your side or anything. You're out there on your own.
It's not
Stinks.
easy. Not easy.
All right. How about a big hand for Mark Lane?
All right. Thank you, guys.
All right, and I want to thank our sponsors. No free info without them. Los Angeles Apparel, Alpha Broder, Stalls, Transfer Express, LAT Apparel, Hirsch, Howard Custom Transfers, and Lane 7 all make this possible. I'm from In Kitchen. Check out our YouTube channel. This will be up there eventually, and there's a lot of other free information, and it's mostly accurate, I will tell you. And thanks to Impressions, who also have a happy hour going on over here. Thank you all for coming.